Fadhel, if you could talk about the importance of modern monetary theory as it relates to an infrastructure bill, particularly one that, you want to call it the Green New Deal, or if you want to call it just one that focuses primarily on clean energy jobs. I mean, I think
I'd be happy with building our bridges and our sewage past the past 60 years of decay.
That's the whole point.
We have basic infrastructure. Like, I don't even understand how we could be talking about creating a new infrastructure when our old infrastructure is just not right. Like, we've got a serious underground sewage issue in Fort Lauderdale with the the pipes are old. So we can't even get the train from here to Orlando. We're so behind.
I mean, an infrastructure bill in the state of Florida alone would be tremendous for the economy.
We have to go back so far.
And I would think that modern monetary theory makes perfect sense for an infrastructure bill because it does pay for itself and it creates the jobs. If it's focused on clean energy jobs, we're reducing our carbon footprint. And we are essentially creating a federal jobs guarantee. We are giving people the opportunity to work. And quite frankly, with having a D+ rating by the engineers, needless
sad
to say, this is not a 1 or 2 year project. This is like a decade-long project we have to undertake, but we should be undertaking right now.
Well, we're going to be underwater. So literally here we are going to be underwater.
Really
so it's a problem.
So if you could talk about MMT as it relates to an infrastructure bill, that would be great.
Absolutely. So number one, this can't be the responsibility of the state of Florida or local municipalities. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the spending capacity. They're going to have to raise tax revenues or borrow, and that's just not going to do it at this point. And it's not like this is the first time we've done it. This is why we go back to the New Deal of the 1930s that actually built the infrastructure of this country that we're talking about now. That's 100 years old infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. Back in the day, everybody thought, well, bringing electricity to remote rural areas, that's just not financially reasonable. And guess what? We set up the rural electrification program and we built highways and infrastructure and water treatment system and so on. And all of those assets are still available and in use today. There's a great website called the livingnewdeal.org or .com website that has actual physical pictures and addresses of things in your own community that were built by the New Deal administration, by WPA workers, your local post office, probably your local water and sewer system, your local state parks and national parks. All of these things are massively productive and have paid for themselves many times over in terms of the tourism they bring and the quality of life and economic activity they bring. We just, lost that tradition and gave up on that tradition because we were told we can't afford it and that's too expensive. We should let the private sector do it. And Jen, on your point that Florida will be underwater, the good news in this, it's not about being underwater, is that the financial industry is finally not just aware of it, but they're actually pushing the panic button behind closed doors right now. I don't know if you've seen this leaked report from JP Morgan about a year ago that actually said, this climate risk about that the IPCC talking about, the IPCC report that says we need to decarbonize rapidly, they said those guys are actually very optimistic. It's much, much worse than that. Why? Because the financial industry, they're in the business of investing in properties, lending money, mortgages, insurance, and so on. So if you get a mortgage today, somewhere in Florida, on the coast, for example, your 30-year mortgage will be what today is 2021. Your last payment will be due in 2051 or 52 or whatever, right? So what the Union of Concerned Scientists have done a couple years ago, they did a study on climate change in coastal properties in the U.S. And they picked the year 2045 as the target date, just to see what happens within the lifetime of a mortgage that you would sign today. Right. They found that we have $1 trillion worth of properties that will be flooded permanently and that will become stranded assets. A stranded asset, its value goes from hundreds of millions of dollars to zero because it's underwater, because it's useless. So now if you're getting a mortgage and 2045 is within the lifetime of that mortgage, then you're on the hook for that. If you're a lender if you're a borrower, if you're an insurance company, if you're a developer. So now they know this is not some futuristic event. This is actually happening right now. So the good news is that
those mortgages, they're not getting
Right.
30-year mortgages down there on the beach.
Exactly.
Jen happens to be from a town called North Miami Beach.
Yeah.
Anytime, and I mean anytime, it rains just a couple of inches,
it's floods.
It's basically
yeah. I mean, it's pretty common.
You know, this area has not taken a direct hit of a hurricane in a long time.
No,
but God forbid it does. It's going to be really bad.
So the good news about this is that the financial industry is going to push the government to build infrastructure for mitigation purposes, at least to protect their interests. We're not saying they're going to go all the way for a Green New Deal, but they're applying pressure. And the fact that Jay Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, came out about 2 months ago for the first time and made an official statement about climate change, and that we need to do something about it. And then 2 weeks later came out and announced that the Fed, for the first time, is going to join a global network of central banks and financial regulators and insurance regulators, who mostly in Europe. It's called NGFS, which is the Network for Greening the Financial Services or something like that. Which means they're now getting the pressure from Wall Street. I mean, it should be the other way around. We should be, having government officials apply the pressure on Wall Street to do the right thing. This time, it's the opposite. It's the financial industry that is telling governments, we need to do something about this because the risk is on our books. And the global estimate for what we call the carbon bubble, which is going to be the biggest financial market collapse when all of those stranded assets collapse in value. The conservative estimate, we're talking about $20 to $30 trillion, possibly more. And all of those financial assets happen to be mostly in the global north, in Wall Street and London and Tokyo and so on. So those institutions are already panicking about the impact of climate change. So you may have noticed, if you followed, and I'm sure you did, you followed the Biden campaign, how they started Green New Deal and all of that. And then by the time he got the nomination, it appeared like all of a sudden the Sunrise Movement is having a voice. All of a sudden the Bernie, views on climate change are becoming more and more prominent. I guarantee you it wasn't Bernie or Sunrise. I mean, I love both of them, and I think they helped quite a bit. But I think it was the Wall Street guys, because what did Biden say over and over and over again? My climate policy was reviewed by Wall Street bankers and Wall Street economists, and they said it's going to. He kept citing them. He didn't cite Sunrise or Bernie because they are the ones who are applying the pressure. So what do they want? They just want an infrastructure to build resilience to protect their interests. They don't want the whole Green New Deal thing, which brings the full package. So we have to dissect all of these things that are about to happen. Yes, by all means, we need a big infrastructure program for Florida and for the rest of the country, and we're all pushing for it. I'm part of a network of organizations here in Appalachia called Reimagining Appalachia in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And we have a Green New Deal-ish blueprint for broadband infrastructure, for green jobs, for manufacturing, for reviving the CCC from the 1930s, for conservation and regenerative agriculture and so on. And you can think of it as a pilot Green New Deal for the region that should be scaled to the rest of the country. So we have a limited window of opportunity in the next few months to really apply pressure and do this big push. Because so far, and I insist on saying so far, not yet, right? So far, the Biden administration, and he made it very clear the last few days, that he's not going to be concerned about the deficit. You know why? Because his economists and economic advisors have been telling him we shouldn't be concerned about the deficit. There is an emergency on climate, on infrastructure, and all of these things. And their justification, and this is the part that I have a problem with, their justification is not what we talked about in the MMT and all of that. Their justification is interest rates are really low now. So if we don't take advantage and borrow and spend right now, it's going to be too expensive in the future. We're not going to afford it, right? So those same economists, at some point when they see the deficit and the national debt number rise in the next year or two with the big infrastructure spending, they're going to start panicking. They're going to think inflation is right around the corner. We're going to go bankrupt. Wall Street is going to, panic. And then they're going to apply pressure on Biden to say, now we need to worry about the deficit. By the way, it's the same, more or less, economic team from the Obama administration.
Yeah, well,
we've heard this story before. Economic relief after 2008. By the time you get to 2012, that's it. Now we have to worry about the deficit. And guess who's going to join them in this chorus? It's going to be the Republicans. We're going to say, oh my God, the deficit, we're going bankrupt, our children, our future generations, and we're turning into a Venezuela. And of course, they're going to cave in and say, the campaign in 2022, I hope not, it's going to be all about the deficit. So we need to, apply pressure on all fronts. One is make sure we get the infrastructure, the climate spending, and all of the economic relief we need immediately. Number two, we have to anticipate and fight back against the deficit phobia, against this obsession with the risk of inflation and all of that from a conservative perspective. If anything, MMT economists are obsessed with inflation because that's the true constraint. Right. And somehow the mainstream economists and establishment politicians, they think of inflation as this unknown beast. And they've acknowledged, even the Fed acknowledge that they have no reliable theory of inflation. In other words, plain English translation, we have no idea what causes inflation.
Right.
Yet somehow they know that a Green New Deal and climate infrastructure will probably be too much and will cause inflation. We need to call their bluff, and we need to educate and empower and mobilize people to push back against this. Even if we're successful with Biden in convincing him that these are all important priorities. Remember what FDR said in the 30s is, I'm with you, I agree with you, you've convinced me, now make me do it. Right, make me do it, which means this is a democratic process issue, yes. Mobilizing the masses, not just angry pitchforks,
right?
What I call well-informed pitchforks who know what the real constraints are and who can push back against the power of Wall Street and the pharmaceuticals and so on. So this is really the challenge for us. It's not going to be, where do we find the money? It's about finding the votes in Congress and applying pressure with every single elected official that, your seat is on the table. If you're not going to support the people, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, you're next to be primaried, you're next to be out, no matter which political affiliation you have, because our lives are on the line.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.